Here's the latest track for Francine. Right now it's a tropical storm, but it's expected to continue to strengthen quickly into a hurricane and then eventually a Category 2 hurricane by Wednesday. The National Hurricane Center hasn't just upgraded the strength of Francine to a Category 2 storm upon landfall, but it's also sped up that landfall to Wednesday afternoon. We have seen a little bit of a change in that forecast track. Also, it's been shifted farther to the west. If you see that center line, it's now located over Lafayette, again a little bit farther west from Baton Rouge, and it no longer includes New Orleans Metro. But because of the strength of this storm, we're still going to see hurricane and tropical storm force winds outside of the cone. Because of that, we have tropical storm watches in effect for the North Shore, Tangipahoa, and St. Tammany parishes, all the way through the river parishes, Orleans, Northern Jefferson, St. Bernard, and then areas offshore, Plaquemines Parish. We also have tropical storm warnings in effect for Northern Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish, which means we could see tropical storm force winds within 36 hours. And hurricane watches are still in effect for Southern Terrebonne Parish, Southern Lafourche, Southern Jefferson, and most of Plaquemines Parish. We're once again watching for potential tropical development in the northwestern Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, the same area that Hurricane Helene formed. But you may have seen some misinformation about the threat that the system poses online, so I want to address these misconceptions. When you see a storm as devastating as Helene has been across Florida, Georgia, and into the Carolinas and parts of Tennessee, it's normal to feel a little bit scared when you see another system trying to form in that same region. And it's completely normal for people to have storm anxiety after they're impacted by a tropical system. But I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook and TikTok of wind maps for just one model run showing another storm in the Gulf the first week of October. So I want to talk about models and how meteorologists interpret modeling and how we use that to build a forecast. I'm going to start with this graphic though, because what this shows us is this is the area of very broad low pressure that we expect to move into this region in orange and try to come together into a tropical system. This is not a cone, this is a potential development area where we could see a tropical depression form. So what we're seeing right now is called the initial conditions, or what is going to be input into the modeling. Those initial conditions will take into account this upper level low and then all these little swirls and thunderstorm activity. The models that I'm going to focus on that are using these initial conditions are going to be global models, because with tropical forecasting this far out, typically that's what we'll use for the long range. For good initial conditions to put into the modeling, you want a wide range of data that comes from weather stations, weather balloons, buoys, radar, satellites, all of that collects data on what's currently occurring. A problem that we have with that is with tropical systems, a lot of this data is happening in areas that don't have a high concentration of data because they're either not in a good network over land or near land, or they're just over water where we don't have a lot of stations to see that data. And sometimes these models don't always initialize correctly, not because the data is necessarily wrong, but it can be sparse, but mainly because the atmosphere is constantly changing and we can't constantly put in that data. So the actual conditions of the atmosphere are always going to be slightly different than that snapshot in time. These initial conditions are just one aspect of weather modeling. Once you have that data in there, you need computing power. All of these are run on supercomputers because they're very complicated and long equations with a lot of variables. That equation then simulates the interactions of those different conditions and what the outcome will be. Emphasis on simulates. Okay, now we put all of these variables into our weather model, and this is what it's coming up with based off of that equation. This is the European model, and what's important to keep in mind at what I'm looking at right now is this is one model run. So this is using one set of data, one set of variables, and one equation to come out with this outcome. What it's forecasting is a low to kind of meander through the northwestern Caribbean and emerge into the Gulf, but very broad. Okay, now we're looking at the GFS, which is the American model, and this is what it sees. Again, this is one model run, so one set of variables that are seeing this outcome. It sees a quite complicated interaction between these lows in the Eastern Pacific and then these lows in the Gulf. Based off of that model run, this is a screenshot of what you could see if someone just posted that one run on Facebook, which is certainly scary for these areas that were just impacted by Helene.